They called my name, Ethan Roy Carter, and the gymnasium erupted in polite applause, not for me really, but because that's what people do when a name is read from a list. Clap. Smile. Move on. I walked across the stage with the same fake calm I'd worn for the last 3 years, shook the principal's hand, gripped the blue folder like it mattered. I turned to face the crowd, rows and rows of parents beaming behind their phones, friends holding signs, siblings crying with pride, and I scanned for my seat, the one I had dreamed about since freshman year, the one I imagined my mom would sit in, maybe with her hair brushed out like it used to be, wearing lipstick again, or my dad, even in his tired office shirt, trying to act like he cared, maybe even my brother, arms crossed, nodding once in approval, but the seat was empty, still unmoved, untouched, just like the voicemail I left my mom 2 nights ago, just like the messages I stopped sending to my dad after he called me a waste of breath during a drunken argument. So I smiled, because what else do you do when you're being watched? And I stepped off the stage. I didn't go to the after party, didn't follow the others to Buffalo Wild Wings or the beach bonfire. Instead, I climbed into my rusted-out pickup, drove to a gas station, and bought a cold cheeseburger wrapped in foil under a flickering heat lamp. I sat there in the parking lot, windows down, June air sticky against my skin, and I ate that burger alone in a wrinkled gown, listening to the sound of other people's laughter in the distance. The moment wasn't just sad. It was surgical, cutting me open in a quiet, permanent way, because it wasn't just about the burger or the truck or even the silence. It was about absence, about how heavy it is to carry milestones by yourself, about realizing you've spent 4 years surviving high school with no one in the bleachers, no one asking about homework, no one showing up to parent-teacher night, not because they were busy, but because they'd already given up. My mother was in her 3rd stint in rehab, oxy, methadone, some cocktail of things she once swore she'd never touch. And my dad? He moved in with his girlfriend 2 towns over last spring, told me, "You're 18. Be a man," then tossed me a grocery card like I was a stray dog. My brother, Jordan, was 23 and emotionally unavailable by choice. He worked construction and came home just to sleep. Once told me, "Don't count on people, Ethan. They'll always find a way to leave." So yeah, there was no one waiting outside the auditorium. No one holding a sign. No one crying. Just me, a cheeseburger, and the hum of an old truck that didn't stall, because that was the one thing I could still rely on. But here's the thing, not everyone left. There were others, people I didn't realize were already standing in the gap where family had failed. Mr. Brooks, my English teacher, the one who stayed after class when he noticed my essays were more therapy than assignments. Mrs. Lynn from the cafeteria, who used to slip me extra cartons of milk, just in case you're hungry later. Coach Myers, who saw the bruises I didn't talk about and taught me how to wrap my own wrists. He never asked questions, but he always kept the gym open late for me. And then there was Mr. Holden, our principal. He shook my hand a little longer than he did the others, held my gaze, and said, low enough for only me to hear, "Ethan, I know today is harder than it looks, but this isn't where your story ends. Call me next week. I've got something for you." I didn't know what he meant, didn't expect much. Adults had made too many promises they never kept. But I called, and that call, it changed everything. If you've ever looked into the crowd and realized no one came for you, this story is for you. Subscribe to Revenge with DMA for stories of quiet strength, chosen families, and rising from the ruins with dignity. And if you've ever faced the world alone when you needed someone most, share your story in the comments. Sometimes the people we wait for never show up, but the ones who do change everything. I almost didn't call. I stared at the number Mr. Halden scribbled on a post-it and stuck inside my diploma folder, wondering if it was just another pity gesture, one of those stay strong things adults say when they don't really want to get involved. But something about the way he said it, "I've got something for you," felt different. So the next Tuesday afternoon, after helping a neighbor move boxes for $40 and a leftover pizza, I sat in the truck, stared at the post-it, and dialed the number. It rang once, twice. "Ethan?" His voice was calm, low, steady, the same way it had been at every assembly, every hallway run-in, every quiet moment when someone needed grounding. "Yeah," I said. "It's me. I'm glad you called." He told me to meet him at the school at PM, back entrance. Said he wanted to show me something. When I pulled into the lot, the building was mostly dark, save for the office lights and the faint glow of the gymnasium. I found him waiting just outside the door in jeans and a faded Colorado State hoodie, nothing like the crisp shirts and ties he wore at school. He waved, unlocked the side door, led me in. We walked in silence down the corridor, the echo of our steps bouncing off lockers that had seen better days. And then we turned into the faculty lounge. It was warm, lit, and filled with something I hadn't expected. Faces, Mrs. Lynn, Coach Myers. Mr. Brooks, even Miss Delgado, the biology teacher I thought hated everyone under the age of 30. They weren't there to lecture me. They weren't there to talk about my potential. They were there because they cared. On the table were takeout boxes, still warm, labeled with my name. A small sheet cake that read, "Congratulations, Ethan," in crooked red icing. And next to it, a card already signed by every person. In the room, I stood frozen, hands trembling, eyes wide. And no one said anything at first. Then Mrs. Lynn walked over, placed a hand gently on my shoulder, and said, "We figured someone ought to celebrate you, right?" That's when I sat down, not because I was tired, but because the weight in my chest finally softened. We ate, we talked, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's world. I felt belonged. After the food and the cake and the laughter I didn't know I still had in me, Mr. Halden pulled me aside. "You're not going to like this part," he said, half smiling. He handed me a stack of papers, applications, scholarship forms, recommendations already written, already signed. "I know you said you weren't going to college," he said, "but I think it's because no one ever told you it was possible." I stared at the papers, my name printed neatly across the top of every one, his handwriting in the margins. "I can't afford." He raised a hand. "There's a program. It's for students who've overcome extraordinary hardship. You meet the criteria. I already called the board. They're waiting to review your file. All you need to do is say yes." I didn't answer right away. Couldn't, because when you've been overlooked for so long, being seen feels foreign, uncomfortable, almost painful. I took the papers home, read every word, woke up the next day and filled them out. That fall, I started community college with a full ride, and just like that, the world cracked open. College wasn't easy. I had to work nights washing dishes, cleaning offices, delivering groceries, but I made it work. And when you've survived dinners of cold burgers and slept in the back of a pickup while your mother detoxed in a metal cot, well, deadlines and textbooks feel like luxuries. My professors noticed I didn't flinch under pressure, that I showed up early, stayed late, turned in more than I was asked to. One of them, a lit professor named Dr. Owen, asked me to stay after class one day. "You write like someone who's had to tell stories just to breathe." That stuck with me. He encouraged me to transfer, helped me apply to a university out of state. 2 years later, I walked into a journalism program ranked top 10 in the country, and this time, Someone was in the crowd when I crossed the stage. My mom.it wasn't easy getting her there. I visited every weekend during her second stint in rehab, sat through the awkward silences, helped her find her voice again. There were relapses. There were nights she called me from the floor of a halfway house, shaking and sobbing, but I never called her weak. I just kept showing up, the way no one showed up for me, and little by little, she stood again. She got clean. She got work. She got herself back, and when I handed her the extra graduation ticket, she cried in a way I'd never seen, not loud, not messy, just real. She wore her best thrift store dress, put on lipstick that wasn't smudged, and when I found her in the crowd that day, she stood up and screamed my name like I was the only one graduating. This time, I didn't scan the crowd. I didn't look for my father. I didn't expect my brother, because I had what I needed: a second chance, a chosen family, and a front row seat, filled by someone who finally remembered how to love out loud. After graduation, life didn't suddenly get easier, but it did get clearer. I started working as a field journalist, small stories at first, local pieces, human interest segments, underdog profiles, the kinds of stories most people skim past. But those were the stories I loved. Because I was one of them, one morning, while writing about a community rebuilding after a flood, I got a call from a familiar number, blocked. Still, I knew who it was. I let it ring for times, then answered. Ethan. It was my dad, same gravel voice, but softer. Like time had taken something from him, or maybe just exposed him. I heard about your graduation, he said. Saw a photo online. Silence. He continued. I guess you really pulled it together. I stared at the wall. Pulled it together? Like I had tripped, spilled some milk, and wiped it off the floor. As if I hadn't clawed my way out of a burning house made of silence, guilt, and neglect. As if I hadn't buried the boy he ignored beneath hours of night work and the weight of becoming my own parent. He went on. I just wanted to say, I was wrong. About a lot of things. Wrong. That was the word he picked. Not sorry. Not I failed you. Not you didn't deserve any of that. Just wrong. I didn't answer. He asked if we could meet. Catch up, he said, like old times. I almost laughed. There were no old times, just long stretches of absence, punctuated by explosions and shame. I'm not angry anymore, I told him, and that was true. But then I added, calmly, I just don't need what you're offering. I already built what you refuse to be. He sighed. Long. Hollow. I guess I deserve that. Yeah, I said. You do. Then I hung up, not out of spite, but out of peace. Because when someone finally realizes what they threw away, you don't have to shout. You just have to keep walking. Weeks later, I came home to visit Mom. She made tea, set the table, burned the soup again, but the kitchen smelled like trying, not like rot or resentment. We sat on the back porch and watched the sun dip behind the trees. She looked over at me, a little tentative. You're not like him, she said softly. I know. She reached for my hand, and thank God for that. We stayed like that for a while. No masks, no pain hiding behind pills or yelling. Just two people who had every reason to give up on each other, and didn't. I never thought I'd see her smile like that again. Clear, present, sober. She asked about my work. She read my articles now. Sometimes she'd call just to say, I didn't know someone could write like this and come from where we came from. That line always stuck with me, because what she didn't know was every word I wrote was for the boy who sat in that truck, alone with a cold burger, begging the universe for just one person to care. Now I was the voice that boy needed, and I used it. Every chance I got. One day, I got a letter in the mail, a job offer, national syndication, column of my own, full creative freedom, and at the bottom of the contract, In bold letters was the name of the editor, Mr. Halden. He had moved on from principal to publishing work, but he never stopped following my journey. I knew you'd make it. His email said, I just wanted to make sure someone was still saving you a seat. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the screen. This wasn't luck. This wasn't charity. This was earned brick by brick, word by word, scar by scar. Now, every semester, I go back to my old high school, talk to the seniors. I tell them the truth that sometimes your real family isn't made of blood. It's made of people who stay, of teachers who notice, of mentors who show up after the final bell, and sometimes the people who abandon you early. Leave just enough space for the ones who truly matter to step in. I look them in the eyes and say, you're not defined by who left. You're defined by what you build from that emptiness. They always go quiet, and I can see it, that flicker of recognition, the nod, the unshed tears. I've been where they are, and now I'm who I once needed, not perfect, not whole, but here and enough. There was a day years ago now when I would have traded anything just to be invited and .to sit at someone's table, .to be part of somebody's family, .to matter enough that someone waited for me to come home. But something strange happens when you stop chasing belonging and start building it. You become the one holding the door open. A few months into my new column, I published a piece called The Boy in the Pickup. It was quiet, raw, just 900 words about that night in the parking lot, about the cold burger, the missing family, the faculty lounge that became my first taste of kindness. I didn't expect much, but the story went viral. Thousands of comments, emails from strangers, letters from people who had sat in their own metaphorical trucks, waiting for someone who never came. One message stood out. It was from a senior in a small town in Kansas. She wrote, I was going to skip graduation. I didn't want to see all the families, the flowers, the signs, when I knew my seat would be empty. But I read your story, and now I think maybe it's okay to sit in the audience of my own life, even if I'm the only one clapping. I cried for her, for me, for everyone who's ever carried silence like armor and grief like a diploma. That night, I added something to my writing desk, a photo, not of my father, not even of my graduation, but of that night in the faculty lounge. Cake, styrofoam plates, mismatched smiles, and a handwritten note from Mr. Brooks taped beside it. You made it, kid. But we always knew you would. Mom's been clean for 3 years now. She works at a local outreach center for women recovering from addiction. Every time she comes home, her car smells like lemon soap and hope. She tells her story now, owns it, doesn't flinch when people ask where she's been. She once said to me, I thought you'd never forgive me. And I told her the truth. I didn't have to. I just needed you to come back. She's here now, and that's what matters. On Sunday nights, we make dinner together, lasagna, mostly. It was the one thing she always got right, even during the chaos. She still burns the garlic bread, still tells the same jokes to fast, still hums off key while she stirs, and I wouldn't change a second of it, because for years I sat through silence. Now I sit through joy. Last Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my place, just a small gathering. Mr. Halden came, Coach Myers, Mrs. Lynn brought lumpia and extra napkins. Even Miss Delgado, who once swore she hated the holidays, showed up with cranberry sauce and a bottle of wine that cost more than my first laptop. We sat at the table I built myself, literally, pine wood, sanded edges, heavy and permanent, something that couldn't be taken away. Caleb, a freshman I'd been mentoring, sat beside me. His story was too familiar. Absent dad, mother working 3 jobs, too much noise in his head, and not enough quiet in his heart. Halfway through dinner, He looked up and whispered, "Is it weird that this feels more like family than anything I've ever had?" I didn't answer right away, just passed him another roll, then said, "No, it's not weird. It's earned, because the families we choose aren't accidents. They're forged through quiet loyalty, small kindnesses, and the decision to stay when others walk away, and that kind of family. It doesn't fade. A few weeks ago, I passed my old truck in a junkyard, rustier than ever, window cracked. Still had the dent from where I hit that parking pole in '09. I almost kept walking, but I stopped, opened the door, and there, tucked in the glove compartment, was a crumpled fast food receipt, June 4th cheeseburger, $3.49. I stared at it for a long time, not because I missed it, but because it reminded me that night wasn't the end. It was the beginning, the moment when everything was stripped away, and the only thing left was the fire inside me. I folded the receipt, slipped it into my wallet, not as a scar, but as a badge, because some of us weren't born into belonging. We had to build it, nail by nail, day by day, word by word, and now I don't wait for a seat at the table. I build the table, and I make damn sure there's always one more chair open, just in case another kid with a cold burger and no one waiting needs to know he's not alone anymore. Success didn't come all at once. It came quietly, like the sun rising behind storm clouds, slow, steady, undeniable. It began with one story, then a column, then a book, and by the time I was 29, I was standing on a stage in New York, holding a glass award that read, National Voice of the Year, Ethan Carter. The crowd rose, the lights blinded, but I saw clearly not the faces, but the empty seats that used to haunt me, because now they were filled. My mom sat front row, dabbing her eyes with a linen handkerchief, makeup carefully done. Behind her, my former teachers, Mr. Halden, Mrs. Lynn, Coach Myers, all flew in unannounced. They never told me they were coming. They just showed up, because that's what real people do. I gave a speech, not loud, not dramatic, just honest. I told them about the boy in the truck, the cold burger, the empty chair, and the people who stayed long enough to become family. The applause was thunderous. But what mattered most came later. A week after the ceremony, I received a letter, not an email, not a message, a letter, handwritten, familiar signature. My father, the man who once said I was a waste, who vanished when I needed a ride to my first debate tournament, who accused me of being too sensitive, then left me to raise myself. His letter was 5 paragraphs long, filled with phrases like, I didn't know you had that in you, and maybe I was too hard because I was scared you'd turn out like me. He wrote about the business he lost, the divorce he didn't expect, the friends who stopped calling, the silence of a house with no pictures on the walls, and then this line, the world sees now what I refused to see. You've become a man I couldn't even imagine being. I sat with those words for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just realized something important. Regret is heavy when you've spent your life throwing gold into the dirt, only to watch the world polish it and call it treasure. A month later, while speaking at a national conference, I spotted him, back of the room, worn jacket, hands folded. He waited until the room cleared, walked up slowly, older now, thinner, eyes hollow. In that specific way only regret can carve, Ethan. He said, voice low. I looked at him, not as a boy desperate for a father, but as a man who no longer needed one. He reached out, as if to shake my hand, then hesitated. I just wanted to say congratulations. I nodded. Thanks. Silence. Stretched. I read your book, he added, the part about the burger. That broke me. I didn't respond. He glanced down, his voice cracking. I was a coward. I see that now. I finally spoke. You weren't just a coward. You were cruel. And silence doesn't erase what you chose to miss. He nodded, didn't argue, didn't defend. Then he asked, "Can I be part of your life now? Even a little?" I looked him in the eyes for the first time. I saw a man, not a monster, not a hero, just a man, broken, bruised, unraveled. And I said, calmly, "I built a life without you. That life is full, not out of spite, but out of survival. I don't need more people to carry. I need people who carried me." He swallowed hard, then whispered, "I understand." He left, didn't look back, and this time, I didn't either. Now I mentor students from broken homes, kids like me, kids like Caleb. I keep a photo of that old pickup truck on my office shelf right next to the award, because one represents where I started, the other what they never saw coming. When people ask how I got here, I say, I stopped waiting for the apology, and I started writing the story no one thought I had in me. Because sometimes the best revenge is building the kind of life the people who broke you can look at without blinking. And when they finally do, when they reach out from their ruins and whisper, "I didn't know who you'd become," you smile, not in pride, but in peace, because they didn't know, but you did.